research team at Earthly. I'm stepping in for Banashri Thapa, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, but put a lot of energy into coordinating this event with Jenny Heineman. Welcome. In this webinar, we're going to be exploring peatlands and their role as a nature-based solution to climate change, as well as other global challenges. In a minute, I will tell you more about why we focus on peatlands at Earthly and our two speakers, Professor Boone Kauffman from Oregon State University and Sally Blyth from Nature Scott. So they will be providing more detail on what peatlands are, why they're important, and current action in tropical and Scottish landscapes. Afterwards, we're going to have a Q&A where we can go deeper into some more critical questions about this, and you can find out more how you can get involved. We're welcoming any questions from the audience as well, so feel free to drop that in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So I think we can start. We can move on to the next slide. So at Earthly, we know that we face the interlinked crises of climate change and biodiversity loss. Often we look at the huge potential nature-based solutions have to contribute to climate mitigation and how this compares to the current amount of funding they receive. And this doesn't even account for the wider benefits they bring to people and society and the funding gaps there. Our aim as a company is to accelerate these investments and help scale high quality projects in different ecosystems around the world. We work across the full spectrum of nature-based solutions. We can move on to the next slide, including protection, restoration, and regeneration of working lands and natural lands. So for example, this could be restoring a coastal wetland or helping farmers introduce regenerative practices into their lands, or even protecting standing forests and peatlands like we're going to talk about today. So in the next slide, you can see peatlands are incredibly important to climate change. Globally, they store over 500 billion tons of carbon, while only covering 3% of the world's area. The destruction and conversion of peatlands for different land uses like palm oil or agriculture now equates to, I think, 5% of global emissions. So peatlands are carbon storehouses and they have really an outsized effect on the climate compared to their size. In terms of biodiversity, their unique characteristics support specialized and rare species. These can be found nowhere else in the world. So orangutans, for example, or in Scotland, it might be birds like the aquatic warbler. Peatlands are also really important for people as they protect against flooding and drought when you re-wet different landscapes, and they help to do many other things like maintaining the water table below ground and improving water and air quality. Boone is going to be telling you a lot more about these values in his talk, so I won't go any further on that. On the next slide, at Earthly, we take a holistic approach to understanding and monitoring the projects that we support. So we try to go beyond carbon and look at the impacts on biodiversity and people. These three factors together strongly influence the success of a nature-based project and their ability to adapt to change and support the people most affected by climate change. We've developed an assessment process that helps us understand and analyze both project behaviors and outcomes with the support of our scientific advisory board. So on the next slide, I can tell you a little bit about one of the projects that we support. It's called the Rimba Raya Biodiversity Reserve Project in Indonesian Borneo. So this project protects 64,000 hectares of one of the most highly endangered ecosystems in the world. The tropical peatland forest was at high risk of being converted to palm oil, which could have resulted in over 100 million tons of carbon being emitted into the atmosphere. The project is helping to conserve a population, one of the last wild orangutan populations on Earth, with Orangutan Foundation International. And they're one of the first projects to demonstrate progress towards all 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So that is a lot of social impact in a peatland project. So last two slides from me. This one is around creating carbon credits from projects. So this is really a critical approach, an opportunity to scale up peatland protection and restoration. There are an increasing number of ways that peatland projects can get funding for their climate contribution, and this does include the Peatland Code in the UK, which was developed with the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. So this code sets out the best practice requirements for doing carbon accounting, and it's expected to have a huge impact on the degraded peatlands of the UK. These ecosystems currently emit 16 million tons of carbon each year, which is a large proportion of all reduction efforts in the UK. So our speaker, Sally, will tell you more about this work and what that funding gap currently looks like. Our mission at Earthly is to leverage the power of nature-based solutions and help remove at least 1 gigaton of carbon by 2030. So thank you very much for listening. I think we can move on to our expert speakers. And I'm really pleased to introduce our first speaker, Boone Kauffman, a research professor at Oregon State University, senior associate at the Center for International Forestry Research, Bogor, Indonesia, our Blue Carbon advisor. And I will let him tell you more about the values of tropical peatlands as natural climate solutions. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all very much. It's an honor to be here and great to have an opportunity to speak to you this morning. And what I'm going to focus on today is those that are the tropical peatlands that exist largely in places such as Indonesia, Malaysia, the Congo, and the Amazon basin. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about peatlands. They cover about just 3% of the Earth's surface, but because of remarkable carbon stocks, they may store as much as 30% of the plant soil carbon. And these estimates are actually growing every year as we learn more about the broad extent of them in places such as Africa and the Amazon. But they easily contain about 20% of the global terrestrial carbon. In terms of the tropical peatlands, they're only about 11, maybe 12% of the total peatland area. Again, this is an underestimate because it's growing, but because they're so huge, the depth of these peats, their volume may be 18 to 25% of all peatlands. Next. The peat swamp forest, as we will often call them, they're true tropical freshwater wetlands. They occur on these deep, organic, rich soils, and sometimes these can be 5 to 7 meters in depth, the peats themselves. And because of this incredible layer of peat, these are amongst the largest carbon stocks, the more carbon in, say, a hectare of land than any other ecosystem on the planet. Next. And sad to say, while they're quite valuable, the deforestation rate, especially in Southeast Asia, has been amongst the highest in the world over the last 2 decades, up to 2.2% of the peat swamp forest being lost per year. Next. And but because they're wetlands, because of this high carbon stocks, because of their resiliency, they're excellent candidates for inclusion in any nature-based solution, such as a REDD strategy, as part of a country's national developed contributions in the Paris Climate Accords, and clearly participation in voluntary markets. Next. As we have said earlier, one of the most amazing aspects honors of my life is getting to work in such unique biological diversity. Some of the most charismatic species, such as the Sumatran tiger, are dependent upon tropical peatlands. Of course, the orangutan, many unique plant species, bird species, all exist in these important tropical wetlands. Next. And as we said earlier, they provide a tremendous numbers of ecosystem services for indigenous peoples, for subsistence farmers and fishers. They have values for not only for climate change, but for water quality, and ecotourism. But sad to say, we're seeing landscapes. You can see the remarkable structural diversity, species diversity in this tropical peat forest. And next slide. But sad to say, this landscape is rapidly being converted into areas such as this, where large areas are being converted to other land uses, in this case, oil palm. Next. There's a whole variety of ways in which these areas are being, the land cover is being altered. You know, drainage for agricultural purposes, slashing and burning. The dominant cause for much of the deforestation in Southeast Asia is oil palm, cattle pasture in other places of the world. We can move on. You can just see the different sizes of canals being built. And the dominant cause, of course, is oil palm. It's amazing how this is in everything. It's in half of all packaged processes at supermarket, most of it coming from Indonesia and Malaysia, of which many are being, as you can see here in this picture in the upper right, are areas where we're converting tropical peat swamp forest into oil palm, resulting in huge greenhouse gas emissions, threatening biological diversity, the livelihoods of the indigenous peoples that have lived here for generations, and of course, health impacts due to smoke, pesticide exposure, etc. Okay, next one. So one of the things I just want to give you a very brief example is how big these carbon stocks are. You can see the areas where not far from Rimba Raya, where we've done a lot of this research in eastern and western and central Kalimantan or Indonesian Borneo. You can see that in areas where we have peats that are 4 to 5 meters deep, the carbon stocks may be as much as a little over, on average, 4,000 tons of carbon per hectare. Now, if we just compare that, the lowland forest in Brazil, that's the Amazon rainforest. That's about 400 tons of carbon. So you can see up to 10 times the carbon stock in these peat swamp forests compared to lowland forest in Brazil. You can see the mangroves of Indonesia, about 1,000 tons per hectare. So you can see that these are truly the largest carbon stocks of any that we've measured so far in the world. Next. So what happens then? One of the questions, in order to participate in carbon markets, we need to know how much carbon is, not only how much carbon we have, but how much is lost with land cover change. And this is how we do this, by looking at, well, asking questions such as, how much carbon is in the peat swamp forest, and how much do we lose when we convert it to an oil palm forest, as you see on the right. And we've done similar type of work in many land uses of the world, for example, mangroves to shrimp ponds. So next slide. So here is just the emissions. This is the greenhouse gas emissions that occurs when you convert various land uses, various ecosystems like mangroves, tropical moist forest from the Amazon again, and PSF is peat swamp forest. And these are the tremendous emissions that you get when you convert a primary forest to these other land uses. You know, it's very, very high when we convert mangroves to shrimp ponds, almost 3,000 tons of carbon per hectare. But again, when we convert these peat swamp forests to oil palm or to other land uses, you can see that these emissions are over 4,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per hectare per year. So these, again, there's no place, no land use on the planet that can have a harder, result in greater amounts of greenhouse gas emissions than the deforestation, land cover, land change in these peat swamp forests. Okay, and just a real quick a picture of us. How do we do this? By measuring the carbon in both landscapes. Okay, so if we wanted to go into like restoration, re-wetting of these landscapes, how much carbon would we gain from this? And you can see here is a grassland that's been degraded with the peat swamp forest in the background. If you look at the graph here, you can see the gray areas are land uses where they are net sources of greenhouse gases. Peat oil palm in Indonesia, for example, every year is pumping out about 25 tons of CO2 equivalent per hectare per year in its existence. The drained peat forest in Indonesia, only 15, that's the grassland you see in front of you. A shrimp pond, about 5 tons per year. Now, if you move over to the green bars above the zero line, those are ecosystems. That's net ecosystem productivity, where we're actually gaining carbon, where these are net carbon sinks. And you can see that some of the highest net carbon sinks are mangroves, and again, these peat swamp forest. And if you're looking at if you combine then the avoided emissions when you restore an area of 25 tons, plus say 9 to 10 tons through the regeneration and the sequestration of carbon, you can see that through restoration, you're actually removing about 35 tons of carbon dioxide per hectare per year through a restoration project. So you can see that these are very, very successful and important restoration or re-rutting projects as well. Okay, next. Okay, so that's about as quickly as I can speak about a very complicated subject, but I just wanted to reiterate to everybody that these are very important candidates for nature-based solutions to address the climate crisis. That's because they have these large ecosystem carbon stocks. Next. They are sources of incredible and magnificent biological diversity. And sad to say, though, when deforested, we see a huge shift from important global carbon sinks to sources of greenhouse gases. Local and livelihoods and sustainable resources are often lost in favor of these export projects. All of these products largely go to the third world. And so through restoration, conservation, there's a lot of social justice, livelihood, meeting sustainable development goals. And they're not only important, but because they're wetlands, they're quite resilient. These are feasible projects. And with that, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Any additional questions, feel free to contact me at any time.
Thank you so much, Boone. It's always really fascinating to learn from your experience, and I can't wait to ask a few more questions when we get to the Q&A.
Cool.
So first, before that, I would like to introduce our second speaker. So that is Sally Blyth, Data and Evidence Manager for Peatland Action at Nature Scot. Peatland Action is a national programme to restore peatlands across Scotland, and it's led and funded by Scottish Government and delivered in partnership with Nature Scot. And Sally's going to tell us more about their experience in delivering peatland restoration. Go ahead.
Thank you, Olivia. Can you hear me? Having a few technical issues this afternoon.
No,
thank you. Good. Okay, thank you. So this presentation is about Peatland Action, which is a Scottish Government partnership established to deliver peatland restoration in Scotland. Peatland restoration is a great example of a nature-based solution to the twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss. Nature-based solutions, as we've already heard, use nature to tackle environmental and social challenges, providing benefits to people and nature, and help us to mitigate and adapt to climate change. The plan has committed to put 250,000 hectares of peatland on the road to recovery or restoration by 2030. There are multiple reasons to restore damaged peatlands in Scotland. Functioning peatlands have many benefits. They store carbon, provide diverse habitat, hold and filter water, so preventing floods and increasing resilience to fire. And they look wonderful. They're part of Scotland's iconic landscape. But in poor condition, drained and unvegetated, they do the opposite, releasing carbon into the atmosphere, contributing to our species loss, speeding up the transmission of water, so increasing flood risk, and adding silt to the water, thus killing species and reducing hydroeconomic returns. Whilst 25% of Scotland's 2 million plus hectares of peatland habitats are functioning well and delivering benefits, 75% are not. As a result, we are not realising the benefits. For example, 15% of Scotland's greenhouse gas emissions come from degraded peatlands. It's worth noting too that not all peatland looks like bog. Much of that in Scotland looks like agricultural grassland or forestry. So in terms of roles and in terms of delivery, Peatland Action is a partnership involving 5 delivery bodies. Other delivery partners are Forestry and Land Scotland, the 2 national parks and Scottish Water. We can fund up to 100% of the individual restoration projects using our budget from Scottish Government. And we manage delivery of the restoration work on the ground through a number of project officers who oversee project design and implementation. Next slide, please. In terms of leadership, we provide leadership and coordination of the common functions that all delivery partners require. More specifically, research. This is led by Scottish Government, but with significant input from Nature Scot, including Peatland Action. Technical advice on restoration techniques. We are about to publish a technical compendium outlining restoration methods, for example. There's communication, training and capacity building, workforce planning and development, private finance, development of procedures and protocols to ensure common approaches, data collection and checking, for example, quality assurance of spatial data to report accurate restoration figures, and restoration monitoring in terms of reporting what has been restored and assessing if restoration is achieving what we want in terms of outcomes, like reduced greenhouse gas emissions and increasing bog wetness. Next slide, please. So this year we're planning to deliver roughly twice as much restored peatland than last year, with only a budget increase of 8%. So Nature Scot is, as one of the partners in Peatland Action, has set itself a target of 8,800 hectares to restore with a budget of £12.9 million. It's a challenge to achieve given the limited demand in design, delivery capacity post-COVID and the economic environment. This year so far, we've restored just over 1,000 hectares. To help deliver and achieve our target, the Nature Scot Peatland Action team comprises 6 teams that lead on particular elements, including the data and evidence team that I manage. The cost of peatland restoration varies according to the technique used and its baseline condition, but at the moment, the average cost is just over £1,000 per hectare. Next slide, please. The challenge we have, whilst we've got a challenging target this year, we know we need to put even more peatland on the road to recovery. The graph here shows where peatland restoration is now and where we need it to be. So along the bottom, we've got the years, and on the x-axis, it's the hectares of peatland that have been restored. What we want to do is to move from the green shaded area A to the grey shaded area B, so that by 2030, we achieve our 250,000 hectares on the road to recovery. In time, we need to see even greater restoration to put all of Scotland's degraded peatland on the road to recovery, i.e. we need to move into the In order to meet the 250,000 hectares on the road to recovery by 2030, we need to upscale our delivery to at least 25,000 hectares per year. We can do this. We need to increase demand, get more land managers to sign up to restore their land, to work more closely with the Peatland Code, aligning where we can. We need to expand the pipeline of projects to increase the number of projects available for investment. We need to train up and expand the workforce delivering restoration on the ground. Number of digger drivers, for example, with the skills to dam ditches, etc. And we need to streamline processes and encourage private finance to invest in this critical work to help ensure Scotland meets net zero emissions of all greenhouse gases by 2045, which is the government target. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sally. It's really, really exciting to learn more about what's actually happening today and the scale that you're expecting this to expand to. So it'd be really, really interesting to dig a bit more into that. So we have about, I think, half an hour left for our panel discussion, which is great because we have a lot of questions that we'd like to explore. For anyone listening, please, again, feel free to add anything into the live Q&A box that we have. And if we run out of time to address any questions, you can email me at olivia@earthly.org, and we can go back to our panelists or our research team for the answers. So yeah, please feel free to do that. So I think we can dive in. I can moderate this Q&A a little. I think we can start with the perception, or I'd love to start with the perception of peatlands and with the past. And this is a question to both you, Boone, and Sally. So peatlands used to be thought of as wastelands, and I guess they still are in many contexts. So do you think there has been this change in perspective, and how has this recognition of their value been achieved? And is it the same everywhere, or is it still kind of catching up in some places?
Yeah, well, I think that historically, from our parents' or grandparents' time, when they were considered wastelands or places of mosquito-infested, worthless areas, to now recognition that these are some of the most valuable ecosystems on our landscapes, in terms of all these ecosystem services that they do provide. Sad to say, and then in many countries of the world, we do have wetlands protections, safeguards, Ramsar protections in many areas of the world. And I think that particularly in their role in contributing to nature-based solutions to address the climate crisis, that their recognition and of an importance is being recognized, both coastal wetlands like blue carbon ecosystems, as well as the peats throughout the world, both in the temperate and the tropical areas of the world.
Thanks. And just to extend the question to Sally as well, do you feel like there has been a change, not just like from the scientific or government communities, restoration communities, but also public perception? Has this changed? So taking Scotland and the work you're doing as an example, would you say the general public kind of value and see the value of peatlands?
Yes, I think overall, yes, I think it's a gradual process. I think it's linked to the economic benefit of having this habitat. In my rather long career with Nature Scott, I started off 30 years ago surveying the peatlands of Caithness and Sutherland and notifying much of that area as sites of special scientific interest, which sort of kick-started the protection regime, if you like, and the change in management of those large areas. And in those days, it was seen very much as, somebody looking out of their window and saying, well, what's so important about this? It's everywhere, because all you could see is, if you opened your back window, was peat bog. And it was just deemed good for extensive sheep grazing, and potentially management of muirburn and some peat cutting, etc. But the value of it as a carbon sink and as a habitat that actually is valuable in terms of its biodiversity, and actually just for its landscape value, its iconic look, I think is being increasingly recognized. Yes, thank you.
That's really good to hear. And just on top of that, because I think people do wonder, why do you think peatlands haven't had much attention? Like, we know they have this huge climate impact and many other values, but they haven't received as much attention or respect as rainforests or forests, for example. So do you think there are any specific reasons why that is? To both of you as well.
I suppose not as dramatic looking perhaps as typical rainforests with its biodiversity richness, and pretty beautiful colours and dashing that are so dramatic, and those The peat bogs, certainly in Scotland, they have their own rich diversity, and it's almost quite a quiet biodiversity. There's a whole range of different bog moss species and invertebrates that are supported by that habitat, and then the vertebrates that are supported by the invertebrates, if you like. But it's not as.
I think we have a slight lag in the connection, so we're not able to hear everything that you're saying, but we definitely caught most of that, and the fact that they're not kind of as charismatic as your rainforest, but they do support a unique suite of species. Did you want to add to that, Boone?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was they, in so many respects, they kind of slipped through the cracks too while we were maybe paying attention to some charismatic species. We weren't fully recognizing the remarkable values of these peat swamp forest or peatlands in the temperate area of the world until very, very recently. And I think that today their recognition of how important they are to be part of naturally determined contributions or nature-based solutions is much higher than it once was.
Yeah, well, it's really promising. Hopefully we're now going to be catching up for all the previous ignorance and way many of us have looked at previous peatlands in the past. So I have a question from the audience, and there seems to be a lot of interest in this. And I think, yeah, it can be sometimes hard to really visualize and understand what re-wetting or restoring a peatland actually looks like. So the question is, how long does it take for a restored area of peatland to regain its ecosystem functionality and the full potential for carbon sequestration? And also in general, what does recovering a peatland look like?
I can address that a little in the tropical situation and then let Sally do on temperate. But what we see is, remember that one graph I showed you of how the areas that are degraded are net sinks of greenhouse gases or sources of greenhouse gases, where they're producing and pumping tremendous quantities of greenhouse gases in the air. Once you start to restore the ecosystem and get the trees to grow, you're controlling fire, you've restored some of the hydrology, you're going to see a pretty rapid shift from net source of greenhouse gases to net sinks of greenhouse gases in the first 2 or 3 years. As these forests begin to reestablish, you're going to see through time, and it may take 100 years to get the structural diversity back, but even in 5-10 years, you're going to have habitats for new species of birds, habitats for large predators and several mammal species. You're seeing soils recover, insect habitat recover. So you start to see the benefits in a short period of time, but these benefits get nothing but better through the decades following restoration.
Thank you so much, Boone. Yeah, I'd also love to hear from you, Sally, and whether you're, based on your current timeframes for the restoration work you've been doing, are you seeing kind of these benefits coming back, and on what timeframes do you expect this to happen?
The time frame issue is a challenging one. If it depends what it is that what sort of habitat you've got on the peat bog that you're trying to restore. So in Peatland Action, we talk about putting a peat bog on the road to recovery rather than being restored. It's for the reason being that it takes a huge amount of time to a peat bog. Say, for example, you can remove trees from a peat bog, drainage ditches, and you can turn it from a tree covered area that looks from distance, within sort of 20 years, you can look from a distance and hardly see any signs of trees or ditches on that peat bog. You might at the end of the day be able to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases being emitted from that restored area. But it's in terms of the biodiversity coming back and the full ecological functionality of that peat bog, it could take, you know, many more decades. And so that's why it's important to set up appropriate monitoring strategies across a selection of these sites, just to understand more clearly what the changes are. So that's an important part of all of our work.
That's really interesting. Thank you, Sally. And to put this in context of a business that is, say, making an investment in a project, whether that's through a carbon credit or through some other mechanism, could you provide some more insight or information on what that money might be used for? I know, Sally, you already gave some hints in your presentation, but if you could expand a little on what this finance is kind of going towards in the process of restoration or even protection. Boone, if you want to jump in, or if it doesn't quite work for you. Oh, you're muted though.
Yeah, I thought that was a question for Sally. You know, in terms of the restoration of the tropical peatlands, you know, the first step usually is restoration of the hydrology to make sure that they're you know, undoing the drainage of these areas when they've been drained for agricultural purposes. Quite often, the vegetation will start to recover on their own. The second one is, of course, training local people to participate and to be active members of the restoration project, and also of the monitoring, reporting, and verification project when they're part of carbon projects. So it is. You know, again, it's a lot of training and people restoring ecosystems, and then fire prevention in many of these areas where fires are very significant, particularly in drying climate, to protect these areas once we've got them on the right trajectory. So.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really interesting to really get a sense for what is needed, what is required to work on one of these projects. And Sally, do you see any kind of differences in the Scottish context in terms of where that money might be going towards?
Well, the issue we have is that we've got a huge hectarage of peatland that is not in good condition, that needs to be restored or put back onto the road to recovery. And whilst we have a huge commitment from Scottish Government, £250 million to spend through the partnership by 2030, as you saw on the graph I showed, there's a huge amount of other peatland out there that you know, that money is not going to address the restoration of that other expansive peat bog. And in order to, you know, meet the net zero emissions target and also all the other benefits of restored peatland in Scotland, we need additional finance coming in to ensure that additional projects can be started on the ground and reap the benefits in terms of social and economic benefits, as well as biodiversity and climate change.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, and so just on like this subject of finance, I'd be really interested to understand how you see the potential for the voluntary carbon finance to play a role in this, kind of scaling all of this work up, and maybe how it could best support peatland restoration projects as a very specific kind of mechanism. Sally, feel free to, if you have kind of a perspective to share that we haven't heard on the voluntary carbon market's potential to contribute. Or maybe we're having some more connection problems. Boone, oh, I think Sally we're unmuted. Just says
I thought Sally was going to answer that, and she's muted. Does she know that?
I think it's there's some connection issues.
Connection issue. Yeah, it keeps on dropping out, so I'm afraid I didn't hear the question.
Oh, that's okay. I'm sorry about that. It's basically we were on the subject of kind of the need to scale and finance these projects, and I'd be really interested to understand your perspective on carbon finance and the best way as such a specific mechanism it might be able to support the scaling of these projects. There is a bit of a lag. I think we might want to, if you could turn your video off.
Well, I'm not a private finance expert at all, I'm afraid, but I'm obviously in some, the Russian. Can you hear now?
Yes, we can hear you.
So whilst I'm not a private finance or finance expert, green finance expert, in Scotland we've got the Peatland Code, which we're encouraging. Well, people can sign up through the Peatland Code and get funding for peatland action projects as well, so that you've got the two mechanisms working together, which at the end of the day would enable investors to benefit from carbon units that are eventually established through the peatland restoration that's taken place at a particular site. So there's ways of generating, if you like, income from peatland that's been restored.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. And we have an audience question kind of building on this issue, just around how Scotland deals with this question of additionality, which is kind of a very carbon finance specific term that talks about whether an investment is having a real additional extra impact that wouldn't have happened without this kind of specific finance for the carbon outcome. So the question is how Scotland deals with the question of additionality, as they wouldn't think that there is a competing financial interest for that kind of land. So for example, there isn't a threat. Say you take the Indonesian context and you have this threat of oil palm plantations. This means that, you know, we need this carbon finance to protect the system. How does that look in Scotland, and how do you think about the additionality of the peatland projects?
I'm afraid I can't answer that question. I would have to put that through to a green finance colleague, I'm afraid. Come back to you on that.
That's no problem. We can definitely do that after this call. I don't know, Boone, if you have thoughts on that. Otherwise, we can move on.
Yeah, I think that the additionality can be pretty well demonstrated in these peat swamp forest, in that even if the demand for oil palm and or products that come from degrading and converting peat swamp forest, if we just did this in other ecosystems, you know, the worst place that you can develop these sorts of agricultural enterprises would be in the sites that result in the greatest amount of greenhouse gas emissions. So if you move to degraded landscapes, areas that are formerly, let's say, unproductive agricultural landscapes, on mineral soils, even limiting your development again to, you know, not developing peat swamp forest, wetlands, and particularly or old growth forest or undisturbed forest, but limiting yourself to degraded upland areas, former agricultural lands, then you can really address the additionality question while even maintaining the commodity products that might come from those lands. But I would just say that the value of the carbon far exceeds the value of agricultural products that come from this land. And I think many countries are recognizing that, Indonesia and Malaysia being two very well-known examples, as well as obviously Scotland. So
I think that's a really, really important perspective to share. And we do have another kind of more technical question on the carbon in these landscapes. And it's really around how these ecosystems how their health and storage of carbon might change or vary as we see increasing kind of temperature and more extremes in weather in the medium to long term. And this is with a specific reference to some kind of contrasting views where kind of, yeah, the different effect of peak warming and how the different rates of warming could affect carbon storage. I don't know if you can speak to that, Boone.
Yeah, the one thing that we do know that we need to address is that the most resilient ecosystems, those that are most resistant to climate change, are the intact forest. You know, they have a microclimate, they store water. Those are the ones that are likely to get us through the climate crisis. It's when you deforest areas, you're actually exacerbating climate change. You're creating warmer and drier conditions. You're bringing in people that are the ignition sources for the fires that now occur when these areas exist. So again, the best approach, the best land management, the best adaptation to climate change that we can have would be to protect and restore these wetlands as quickly as we can.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And do you know if there is any risk that peatlands could start to release carbon as the climate warms? I think there was also an idea that there could be a negative feedback, particularly in northern peatlands. So maybe in places like Scotland.
That's clearly one of the biggest examples is the positive feedbacks of losing the permafrost layers, and then these areas that have been storing methane in particular for centuries now becoming net sources of greenhouse gases.
Yeah. So that's definitely something we want to avoid, especially in all of these northern regions where
Which is, you know, of course, why we need to limit our temperature rise to as least as possible, certainly hopefully keeping it under 2 degrees C.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I was hoping to get back a little bit to some of these context specifics, because it's amazing to have kind of a tropical peatland and temperate peatland experts on this call. But before that, I thought we could spend just a couple more minutes kind of going beyond carbon and even biodiversity, because obviously you've really demonstrated they have this huge potential for climate action. But when it comes to people and local communities, could you expand on the specific benefits in different contexts and why you think businesses should care and support these projects in this social context? And maybe Boone, you would be well placed to address this question, but Sally, if you'd want to add anything afterwards from the UK context. Oh, you're muted though.
I think that most of the projects that we're involved with in tropical peatlands would be absolutely necessary to involve local communities, to involve local people. Quite often the restoration and management is going to be more labor intensive and create more jobs than, say, maybe large industrial agricultural lands may do. But it entails, but when we start to restore water quality, restore the flood functionings of these ecosystems, then we're also creating a better, you know, life for the people where they're not so vulnerable to climate caused disasters such as floods, minimizing fires that would occur in these areas, which, you know, are remarkable jumps in respiratory illnesses, even infant mortality in these parts of the world where fires are so devastating. So we see that not only are we getting the benefits of restored ecosystems through carbon, through biodiversity, but this also creates new opportunities as well, the monitoring and reporting of the carbon, the perhaps ecotourism values for this magnificent biological diversity. People will pay to see orangutans, for example. So we do hopefully would create opportunities for local people while at the same time creating this global benefit as well. That should be in our objectives, nonetheless.
Definitely.
And from perspective, definitely the rural employment is a big positive thing in terms of getting people out in the local environment, and feeding back into the local economies of some of these really very rural and often quite remote communities. That's really important.
Yeah, thank you, Sally. So just on this issue of comparison between these two places, I have a question from the audience, which is, why did jungle peatlands sequester so much more carbon than the ones in the far northern hemisphere?
Well, that's one of the reasons, of course, is we have a 365-day-a-year growing season. They are, photosynthesizing and sequestering carbon and never freezing through the year. So just the mere fact that the plants are growing all the time, that they're is probably the whole there's a whole variety of geomorphic and hydrologic reasons, but largely just the fact that we're in the tropics, I think, is the biggest example. I will say, though, that these boreal peats are very, very important. They do, through the thousands of years of their existence, store a tremendous quantity of carbon as well. So they're all ecosystems are important. Just finish with that.
No, that's great. That's a really good point to add, and important not to forget. They all have their unique contexts and matter in those, as well as globally. So I'm curious in terms of leadership, like we've spoken about some specific countries where there are kind of majority of peatlands. We see in Indonesia, you were saying Malaysia, less so in the Amazon, growing understanding of in the Congo. But who do you think, or where do you think countries are demonstrating the most leadership when it comes to peatland protection or restoration? Are there any countries internationally that really seem to be leading the way?
Well,
Sally,
I think,
sorry.
Sally,
I don't know.
It's obviously Scotland's leading the way.
Thank you. You were talking about the tropics there, but I think from a temporal region, we'd certainly like to think that Scotland is leading away. We've done an awful lot in a relatively short space of time in terms of developing techniques that work and getting our heads around what needs to be done in what order, etc. So from world leader, I would hope that Scotland is up there, but I'll let Boone join the conversation.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sally.
No, I think that fortunately the temperate regions, I find it very impressive that Scotland, is one of the first countries that have committed to rewilding much of their areas. So they're an example that we can all look to. I think that Indonesia is starting to become aware of the values and the importance of including peatlands in their nationally determined contributions and welcoming voluntary carbon market participation in that part of the world. Malaysia as well. Many of the Southeast Asian countries are starting to recognize the value of these ecosystems. So.
And do you think where do you think more kind of the most work is needed, or perhaps where certain peatlands in certain places are underrepresented right now in terms of their access to finance or support from government or whatever that might be?
Well, I think that we're still discovering these peatlands, and quite often I think it's too late. So I think we discovered the value of peatlands, say in Indonesia and Malaysia, after 20 years after we've seen these massive rates of deforestation and ongoing rates of deforestation. So, but areas such as the Congo nations, the Amazon nations, where we're starting to say, hey, there's peatlands here as well. And these are also susceptible to land use, land cover changes for many of the same reasons that they are in Indonesia. They're water, they're close to people, close to rivers and commercial outlets. So I think that so throughout the world, we have opportunities for participation in protecting these areas through carbon financing.
And are you able to reference, this is to both of you. I'll let you figure out who goes first, but are there any other kind of key projects or developments around the world that we or the audience here should know about or could look into after this talk? Sally, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm aware that Chile, for example, is following the COP26 last year. They've been in touch with us in Scotland in terms of looking at developing a memo of understanding in terms of sharing knowledge about peatland restoration and the techniques, lessons learned, that sort of thing. So I think there's probably a whole range of different countries out there with a range of projects that are on the go that just need to be better connected. And obviously these sorts of webinars are an opportunity for that connectivity to increase, but also I think attending those sorts of international conferences should raise the flag for peatlands in going forward.
Thank you. So we have just 2 minutes. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Boone.
Yeah, no, I would just say that I think that there is a growing recognition, and right before the COP meeting that's ongoing right now, I had inquiries from Coalition of Rainforest Nations. Many of the small nations of the world, are very interested in seeing how they can be stronger participants in carbon markets and that result in the protection and restoration of their tropical wetlands, whether they be blue carbon ecosystems or the freshwater peatlands. So I think that there's a growing awareness and interest in many nations of the world.
Thank you. So last question, because we have 1 minute. I would love, just for our audience, would you both be able to make one recommendation to businesses that are looking to get started and invest in this kind of project with high impact? This recommendation could be anything around what they should be looking for or how they might get involved. It would be great to hear from you on this, and then we can close up the webinar. Sally, if you want to go first.
Yeah, just I would encourage businesses to look at the Peatland Action website and to make contacts through that to understand a bit more about the green finance connected to peatlands, because we can make those connections and pass messages on to colleagues where there is that interest. There's a lot of material on the website which would give a better rounded understanding of Peatland Action and what it's all about, if you like. I've just really touched the surface this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just might add that these globally are such important and critical ecosystems that if a corporation would like to address truly the biological diversity crisis, some of the most threatened and endangered species of animals in the world exist in these habitats: the Sumatran tiger, the clouded leopard, the Java rhino, orangutans. There's opportunities not only to address the climate crisis, but to preserve and protect some of the most endangered animals in the world as well. So, and again, on a per hectare basis, preserving, conserving, restoring these wetlands has perhaps the greatest bang for the buck of any other ecosystem that we can address as well. So it's money and effort well placed.
Thank you so much. Thank you. You have both given us, I think, especially me, so much to think about, a better understanding as well of the kind of geographic distribution of these benefits, and just a more in-depth understanding on why it's really, really important that we scale up this kind of investment in all the places where these ecosystems exist, not just for climate, not just for biodiversity, but people as well. So yeah, I'm really excited to see how this conversation and action evolves. So yeah, thank you both so much for your time. I think we can end the webinar now. And thank you to the audience for attending and for your questions. It was great to see so much engagement, and hopefully we can continue the conversation via email. Feel free to email us with any additional questions you might have or desires to engage.